Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a detailed analysis. So let's cover these topics as comprehensively as possible so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. If you want to experience our platinum classes, you have a great opportunity as you get free access to platinum sessions starting from yesterday and till tomorrow. So today at 7 p.m., Sham sir will be taking up a free platinum session on Indian economy. Under the platinum program, we provide a seamless two-way interactive experience where the students' cameras are also turned on as a mandatory policy so that the teachers can take a look at the students, hold them accountable, ensure that a lively interaction is maintained between the educator and the students. And the batch size is always kept very small to ensure adequate attention is paid to each and every student. So if you're interested to experience what Platinum is all about, you have a great opportunity to attend this class absolutely free. So the link for today's session, which starts at 7 p.m., is provided in the description box below. Now let's get started and look at the first topic. On page number 8, there's a detailed column on the solid waste management rules 2026 that was recently notified by the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. These rules were notified in April and has taken effect. And this seeks to transform solid waste management in the country. So the article carries out a critical assessment of these new set of rules. So let's take a unbiased view at the solid waste management rules of 2026. The topic can be very, very important for prelims and as well as for mains. So first, let's understand the solid waste problem that India is tackling with. Let's talk about the key provisions of the solid waste management rules of 2026. And then we will carry out a critical assessment based on the author's view and opinion. Now, in India, one of the biggest problems that we deal with regard to waste management is how to manage solid waste that is primarily generated in urban areas handled by our municipal bodies. And today, solid waste is not just limited to urban areas. Even in rural parts of India, large quantities of solid waste is being generated. But the local bodies, they lack the capacity and the resources to scientifically collect, segregate, and manage the solid waste which is being pushed into the system. Now, this is a serious environmental risk because solid waste will not only include wet waste and dry waste, it could include hazardous waste substances as well, which could leak into the environment, which can pollute the soil, pollute the groundwater table, pollute the water systems, and even cause air pollution. It can even emit greenhouse gas emissions like methane, contributing to global warming and climate change. This could even spread several diseases if the waste is not scientifically managed. So let's understand the scale of this problem that India is faced with. According to the latest reports from the Central Pollution Control Board, India processes and generates around 620 lakh tons of solid waste annually, which is essentially 1.85 lakh tons on a daily basis. And this is no longer an urban problem. It is being seen in rural parts of India as well. Even in the small tier 2, tier 3 cities, small towns, the huge quantities of waste being generated on a daily basis has become a Herculean task for the government to manage. So, this responsibility to manage solid waste rests not just with the central government, but more importantly with the state government and especially with the local bodies, the panchayats and the municipal bodies. They play a critical role in collection, segregation, and processing of solid waste. Now, this is where India finds the task to be extremely challenging. Much of the waste is not being segregated at the source. Segregation of waste into different categories at the source will make the task much easier and simpler, and it is the most scientific and effective method to handle and process any type of solid waste. So for that you need strict rules, enforcement, better awareness, and behavioral changes amongst the citizens. The practice of segregating wet waste from dry waste and collecting any other waste separately in color coded bins is a basic practice which has to be inculcated. Now, India already had a set of rules, the solid waste management rules of 2016. But however, these were not properly enforced. The Central Pollution Control Board, in coordination with state governments, local bodies, the state level pollution control boards, they've largely failed to impose the penalties for violating these rules in the past. These rules have largely been followed in violation than in compliance. So that is one of the reasons why the Environment Ministry has replaced the old rules with a new set of rules that were notified in April. Now, let's understand some of the key highlights and key provisions of the new solid waste management rules of India. See, these rules have already taken effect from 1st of April. So you should understand how does this affect you as well. So these rules essentially they seek to revamp the entire life cycle of how solid waste is managed in the country, right from the collection of waste and segregation at source to the scientific processing, including recycling, to create a circular economy and ensuring that hazardous waste is safely handled, to minimize the impact on environment and human health, to introduce better tracking and monitoring of the enforcement of these rules. The new set of rules that are notified covers this entire spectrum of the management of waste in the country. They have been notified under the Environment Protection Act, the EPA of 1986. It promotes digitization of waste management in the country. It introduces a digital monitoring tool to ensure that the center can keep an eye on how states and local bodies are managing and processing waste in the country. This is designed to bring in greater efficiency and ensure that there is a feedback loop so that corrective measures can be initiated. It also brings forward the EPR principle, the extended producer responsibility principle, which can be seen in all the waste management rules that we have in the country. This was present in the old 2016 solid waste management rules as well, but it was not properly enforced. You find extended producer responsibility concept being implemented with regard to e-waste management and other hazardous waste management as well. Under extended producer responsibility, the producers are essentially held responsible for the entire life cycle of a product that they are producing. For example, in electronics industry, the manufacturing industries, they will have to create a life cycle where they can track the disposal of the electronic goods and collect them scientifically, create an incentive for the consumers to dispose them in a scientific manner, and process the waste so that they can recycle some of the material to create a circular economy, to minimize the stress on resources. And the rest of the waste can be scientifically managed. Because, see, much of the waste ends up in landfills in countries like India. For example, on the outskirts of Delhi, you might have seen these mountains of landfills at Okla, at Ghazipur. These landfills have become notorious. Over the decades, massive quantities of waste have been dumped and piled upon, and the height has even reached up to 60 to 70 meters, almost turning into a mini mountain. So, the extent of pollution that occurs over here, the hazard that is present to the environment, to human health, is unimaginable. Because in landfills, you will not only have degradable waste, which will naturally degrade, decompose, and break down, you will also have hazardous, dangerous substances from forever chemicals to everlasting plastics, which can start breaking down and turn into microplastics, to even toxic chemicals And under the influence of the natural elements, particularly heat and rain, these elements, they start reacting and they start leaching toxic substances into the soil, into the groundwater, into the nearby water bodies, and it even releases massive quantities of methane, contributing to global warming. So that is the reason why it's critical to promote the concept of circular economy, to try and scientifically collect the waste, ensure that waste is segregated at the source itself, and according to the different categories, it has to be processed in a scientific manner. Whatever can be recovered back into the economy can be brought back, which can not only help tackle pollution and waste management, but it can reduce the stress on resources. It's a more sustainable way of building an economy. Extended producer responsibility places that accountability on the producers to create an entire life cycle to ensure that the waste being generated from the respective industries is eventually handled in a scientific manner. So these principles, though they were present previously as well, it was never enforced properly. So the new set of rules provides for better enforcement. In fact, violators would also be penalized with hefty penalties by the Central Pollution Control Board and the state pollution control boards. The polluter pays principle is again something which is globally accepted, just like extended producer responsibility. Those who are responsible for polluting the environment, they should pay the fines. They should be held accountable financially as well. And though these principles were already present, these concepts were already seen in the 2016 solid waste management rules, they were never properly implemented or enforced. So the new set of rules comes out with a slightly better architecture to enforce these regulations so that we can scientifically manage the solid waste in India. Now let's look at the key provisions. The 2026 solid waste management rules provides for mandatory four-way segregation, not just for all the individual citizens and households. This will apply for large bulk waste generators. It could be hospitals, it could be restaurants, industries, factories, commercial establishments, or even government entities. So every stakeholder who is generating waste, who are essentially the source for waste generation, now they have an obligation on them to segregate the waste mandatorily into four categories, into a green, blue, red, and a special care bin. You can see the color coding as well for easy identification and segregation. The green bin is primarily for wet waste. The wet waste primarily generated in our kitchens, items which can naturally degrade and decompose, right? Food items in particular, paper, etc. Then dry waste may be cardboard and other waste commodities, including plastics, generated at the household and institutional level. Sanitary waste, which can even be a biohazard. This could include sanitary pads, condoms, and any other personal usage hygiene equipment. This will have to be handled separately to ensure that there is no contamination. And a special care waste, a black bin, to deal with specific commodities which could be harmful: paint, medicines, bulbs, or any material having glass. So they all have to be segregated as per these color coded segregation that is now being strictly enforced. And eventually it will lie on the local bodies to implement this, which means they'll have to spread the awareness amongst the people, create that behavioral change, create an incentive model, encourage them to segregate the waste at source. Because even the smallest segregation is very critical, right? Because segregation, if it doesn't happen at source, then later on, throughout the recycling process or waste management process, it is nearly impossible to segregate the waste materials. Because from your wet waste, right, the organic content can be used to probably produce fertilizers. From dry waste and the other waste categories, the high calorific value material like paper, plastics, textiles, they can be used to generate a fuel which can be used in the industry. And from other hazardous substances, where the e-waste management rules will apply for electronic goods, some of the precious metals and components can be recovered and can be recycled back into the industry, creating a proper circular economy model. Now, this notification clearly defines bulk waste generators. It makes a distinction between household level waste being generated and bulk waste being generated, especially by commercial establishments and institutions. So it defines which institutions fall under the category of bulk waste generators. This could be government departments and local bodies themselves. It could be residential complexes, right? Commercial establishments, industries, hotels, factories, hospitals. These bulk waste generators, they will have to mandatorily secure the bulk waste generator responsibility certificate, meaning they have a responsibility to create an entire life cycle for collecting waste, segregating it, and managing and processing it scientifically. If possible, it has to be done on site. The policy is encouraging large institutions and bulk waste generators to have on site waste management systems. So, residential complexes might be mandated through local bylaws to have a mandatory waste management system which is located within the apartment complex, like how a sewage treatment plant has been made mandatory. Right? Similarly, solid waste management plants can be made mandatory as part of these rules, and it'll basically lie with the local bodies to implement this through their bylaws. The central government is also setting up a digitized online portal to track the entire movement of solid waste in the country, from registration and certification to the establishment of processing facilities, recycling centers, the quantum of waste being collected, being processed. All the data would be computerized, would be digitized to enable efficient tracking. And this creates a valuable feedback loop to help correct the policy as we progress with the implementation of these new rules. It also mandates the usage of RDF, refuse delivered fuel, which can be used in the industries. See, this is a fuel generated by the waste which is present in the system, especially waste which has a high calorific value. Plastics materials have a high calorific value, textiles, paper, right? They all have high calorific value. And if they are difficult to recycle and process, it can be shredded and dehydrated in order to produce this unique industrial fuel called refuse derived fuel, which has an industrial application, right? So this can primarily be used in cement plants, in waste to energy plants. So they are now being mandated to make use of the urban waste and the solid waste to generate RDF fuel to be used for industrial purposes. Then with regard to landfills in the country, new regulations are being brought in. The old legacy landfills, which are standing from decades, which have become polluting grounds, they will be focused upon for bioremediation and biomining. Using natural methods, the contamination levels will have to be managed. Some of the hazardous waste will have to be removed to manage the pile of waste which has been accumulated at these landfills. So this responsibility again will vest with the local bodies to focus on bioremediation and biomining to ensure that legacy landfills, the old dump yards which are there, especially in urban centers on the outskirts, they will have to be managed in a scientific manner to minimize the environmental impact. And the new landfills which are coming up or which are going to be used, they will be under proper audit and assessment, where local bodies will have to submit periodic data to the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change so that there is a centralized monitoring of how landfills are being managed in the country. Then with regard to areas which witness a lot of tourist inflow, like islands, pilgrimage centers, hilly mountainous regions, the local bodies can even levy a user fee on the tourists and use this revenue for waste management. Because in hilly areas and islands and other tourist places, local bodies may not be having sufficient financial resources. But the tourists who keep coming in might be the source of waste generation. So imposing a local tax on the tourists, a waste management tax, will bring the much needed revenue for the local bodies, which can be channeled towards waste management. So these are some of the key highlights that you find under the solid waste management rules of 2026. Now let's quickly carry out a critical assessment of the policy. As you saw, the policy definitely has a number of positive aspects. The central government, the environment ministry, they have introduced a number of provisions. They have reiterated some of the existing principles and concepts, providing for better enforcement, better tracking, and accountability. But however, there is a design flaw according to this article. In the very structure of this plan, there is a major administrative concern which has been flagged by the author. This system that the center is pushing for is entirely built on centralization, meaning the central government will play an excessive role, and it basically restricts the role of the states and the local bodies. When it comes to planning, the center is assuming that states and local bodies are not capable of planning their own waste management rules. The center is imposing this through a centralized model. And this, according to the writer, could probably fail because experience in public administration shows that heavy centralization is never good for achieving results at the grassroots level. If you want better implementation of regulations at the grassroots level, you need local bodies. You need the state governments to play a bigger role. So according to the article, the solid waste management rules, they go against the spirit of federalism. They completely destroy the spirit of federalism, giving the central government, the environment ministry, a significant role to try and enforce its view on local bodies and state governments. Because see, the Environment Protection Act of 1986 was enacted by the Indian Parliament by using the special power under Article 253 of the Indian Constitution. Under Article 253, the Parliament has the power to pass laws even on state subjects, concurrent subjects, in order to fulfill India's international obligations, to fulfill our commitments to an international treaty or an international convention. The Parliament can pass a law even if it overlaps with the jurisdiction of the state governments or it falls into the concurrent list as well. So India had become a party to the Stockholm Declaration of 1972. So as a follow-up to this, India enacted the EPA following the Bhopal gas tragedy. The Stockholm Declaration was one of the first environment-related declarations to deal with waste and environmental hazards. It mainly focused on the idea of polluter pays principle. And following the Bhopal gas disaster, India realized that we didn't have sufficient legal framework to hold the polluters accountable and extract penalties from them in order to protect and conserve the environment. So, following the Bhopal gas tragedy, in accordance with our commitments to the Stockholm Declaration, India enacted the Environment Protection Act of 1986. So, this allows the Parliament to exercise a certain degree of control even over state and local subjects on health, on sanitation, on urban governance, agriculture, water management, and land management. Even in these areas, which are generally under the state, some of them are under concurrent list. Even here, the center can exercise complete control, thus rendering the states to a subordinate authority. Now, according to the article, when you over centralize any plan, any policy, most likely the implementation is going to falter. When you look at various government schemes, welfare programs that have been implemented, the center provides a certain approach, a framework, and states are usually expected to blindly follow the framework given by the center. Because policy making at the center is based on the presumption that states and local bodies don't have the capacity, don't have the knowledge, don't have the resources to handle the implementation of policies. But if you look at various thinkers, global experience in public administration, if you look at what many philosophers and economists have said about public administration, most thinkers agree that when you provide for excessive centralization, the solutions may not work on the ground. Now, if you look at where authority lies and where knowledge is located, it's very important to ensure that authority is present where knowledge is co-located. That's when policy implementation will be most effective. Now, when you look at waste generated at the local level, it's definitely local bodies which have a better knowledge of what kind of waste is being generated, how it is being processed, what's the problem in segregation of waste. This local knowledge will never be available to the central government easily, right? So there is a very popular theory in development economics and in public administration that where knowledge is present, knowledge about that particular matter, about that domain, that is exactly where authority should be co-located. That's when accountability will be there. That's where efficient governance can be done. This theory was widely popularized by Friedrich Hayek, a very popular Austrian economist, a Nobel laureate. He strongly believed that no individual can ever have all the knowledge and intellectual capacity. No single institution can ever have complete knowledge of everything that is happening. No matter how powerful is the central government, no matter what resources and capacity it has, it can never develop in depth local knowledge on various issues. That is why decentralization is seen as the best model for governance, where authority is co located with knowledge, where knowledge is often present at the grassroots level. When you look at the principle of subsidiarity, as per the principle of subsidiarity, under the principle of subsidiarity, which is an organizing principle seen in the corporate world, seen in governance, it's very important to ensure that the lower levels in the pyramid, in the hierarchy, are authorized to exercise a degree of autonomy. Because when you provide for central enforcement, as I said, the domain expertise and knowledge may not be present. The localized context may not be taken into consideration. So when you focus heavily on centralized planning and implementation, what happens is that you're going to create a one size fits all solution, right? For example, you can't have the same size of shoes for everyone in the country, right? It has to be customized. So the same happens in governance, in development economics. Whenever you're dealing with an administrative problem, it could be waste management, it could be employment related issues, it could be urban development, right? Any policy issue, the authority to tackle the issue should be present at the local level where the knowledge of that particular issue is present. You can't expect a centralized planning institution, a central government, to possess all the collective knowledge. It's not possible, right? This is a limitation that's present in our human system itself. So when you delegate authority and co-locate authority with knowledge, that too at the grassroots level by following the principle of subsidiarity, that is when efficient governance can be seen. The center should create a broad framework, a flexible framework, and allow the states and local governments to innovate, to experiment based on what they learn at the grassroots level. In fact, another Nobel laureate, Kenneth Arrow, is also a strong believer that local institutions, they should be allowed to experiment and learn. In his famous work, The Economic Implications of Learning by Doing, you will learn to do things better only when you actually do it, right? And this was established by him through economic models that he had studied, analyzed throughout his life. He clearly pointed out that local institutions, initially, they may lack the capacity, but once you give them the authority and autonomy, allow them to experiment, allow them to do the work, they will start picking up the knowledge. The decision making will become slightly better day by day, year by year, because there is a local feedback loop which will operate. And only local institutions can take into account the local factors of time and space and context. And using this experimentation, the feedback being generated will eventually result in improved governance. So if the central government tries to take over the entire responsibility, assuming that states don't know enough or local bodies don't have enough resources, it only leads to excessive centralization, it erodes federalism, and it goes against the spirit of decentralization. It goes against the principle of subsidiarity. So this is the challenge, right? This is the key criticism that experts are pointing out in the solid waste management rules, that it is heavily centralized, right? It is providing a one size fits all solution. Now, look at this practically. How can one basic model can be implemented across India in a city like Mumbai or Delhi or Bengaluru with a population of more than 1 crore, right? The scale and kind of waste being generated is entirely different. You can't apply the exact same model in a small hilly mountainous area in the Himalayan belt. You can't apply this in a small town located near a forested area or a small town in northeast India. You need to provide a flexible approach where the required customization can be done, and that authority will have to be devolved to the grassroots level where the knowledge is actually present about the local context. The challenges in Aswal might be different from challenges in Shimla. The challenges in Hyderabad might be different from the challenges in Ahmedabad. So, if greater flexibility is not provided, and if the center is excessively trying to control how waste management happens in the country, more likely the plan is likely to fail, right? We might again see a repeat of the previous set of rules where there was very poor enforcement and it may not align with the local circumstances. Because in some parts of the country, you might have a lot of industries generating a different kind of waste. In some rural pockets, small towns, maybe agricultural waste is predominant, right? So the problem, the challenge varies from place to place, city to city, town to town, village to village. And unless and until that localization is provided through a decentralized model, these rules will never be effective. So that is the crux of the article. Now, based on what we have discussed, take up this practice question and please practice your mains answer writing. Now, let's move to the next topic. On page 6, there's a detailed article on India's transforming relationship with Vietnam. Recently, Vietnam's president, To Lam, carried out a high profile state visit to India just last week. During this visit, the Vietnamese president he made a remark on the close friendship that India and Vietnam have shared from many decades, dating back to the non aligned period, dating back to the Vietnam War, how the then Indian government had largely taken a neutral stand and opposed the American military intervention in Vietnam, and later how India built good relations with communist Vietnam as Vietnam became a communist state following the exit of the American troops and Vietnam unified. India built a very close relationship because by late 70s, India also had aligned with the Soviet bloc. India had almost abandoned non-aligned movement and aligned with the USSR. So this commonality brought India Vietnam closer historically. That's exactly what the president spoke about, the close historical ties and the close strategic defense relations that both countries have shared. Now, in today's context, this is very crucial for us because Vietnam is a key focus country under the Act East policy of India. The Act East, which is an upgradation of the Look East policy being implemented since 2014 by the Modi government, prioritizes Southeast and East Asia region to expand India's economic and strategic and defense and cultural influence across this region. Today, the Indo-Pacific has become the global focal point, and Southeast Asia region sits at the very heart of the Indo-Pacific. So Vietnam faces the South China Sea and has standing territorial and maritime disputes with China. It has to deal with an aggressive China constantly. And this creates a common concern for India and Vietnam. Now, when you look at the background of this relationship, there's a very special partnership that has developed over the decades. See, during the Cold War era, initially India had to be a little neutral given its commitment to the non aligned principles. But during the Vietnam War, as I told you, in 1960s and 1970s, India ensured that it opposed any external interference, especially the US military invasion of Vietnam was openly opposed by India as India took a clear stand against any such imperialist militaristic moves by big global powers. Then later on, as Vietnam managed to kick out the American troops and Vietnam unified and turned into a communist state, India opened up to the country very early on. And from 1980s itself, we built a very close partnership with Vietnam. This was also because by then India had aligned with the Soviet Union. So in the 1980s and 1990s, all the way till early 2000s, both countries procured Soviet and Russian weaponry, which can be found in their armed forces even today. Take, for example, some of the submarines operated by Indian Navy and the Vietnamese Navy, the Russian Kilo class submarines. That's a common equipment that we have. Look at the Sukhoi 30 MKI fighter jets. It's operated not just by the Indian Air Force, but even by Vietnam. So we have a lot of Soviet legacy military hardware that both countries operate. We have a lot of Russian military equipment that both countries have procured. So, for many years, India has managed to cultivate a close defense partnership because of the common weapon platforms that we operate, which are of Soviet and Russian origin. So, India has been supplying spare parts. India has been supplying. India has been a key supplier of defense spare parts and components to help in servicing Vietnam's military hardware. India also helps Vietnam in training. Indian Navy trains the submariners of Vietnamese Navy. Indian Air Force has been training Vietnamese fighter pilots on Sukhoi 30 fighter jets. So military training and supply of spare parts and components for servicing of the Russian Soviet military hardware has been an integral part of our defense cooperation. And of late, we have stepped up this relationship. See, in 2016, India-Vietnam elevated the relationship to the strategic partnership level with great focus on defense relations and strategic ties. Because an aggressive China had become a common threat. In 2011, I still remember an incident when Vietnam had invited India to jointly explore oil in the South China Sea near the Paracel Island Group. So India's ONGC Videsh Limited, under the then Manmohan Singh government, had dispatched a vessel to take part in this joint exploration, and it was escorted by a Indian naval warship. So when this exploration was being carried out jointly by India and Vietnam, Chinese PLA Navy, they intercepted the Indian vessels and openly threatened them, asking them to leave the waters, thus disrupting the freedom of navigation. Though the exploration was happening in Vietnam's EEZ, which technically is international waters, China interfered with freedom of navigation against the principles of UN Convention on Law of the Sea. So since then, India has reiterated that China cannot violate the rules-based order, that China needs to respect the international rules under UN Convention on Law of the Sea. And it became a common concern, which led India Vietnam to get closer even further. So India extended lines of credit, concessional loans were extended. So Vietnam could procure defense commodities from India, particularly the spare parts for Russian and Soviet submarines and fighter jets. So India has given concessional loans to Vietnam, primarily in the defense sector, increasing our defense exports to Vietnam. Then recently in 2023, India handed over a missile corvette vessel, INS Kirpan, as a friendly gesture to strengthen the Vietnamese Navy. So a missile corvette, a naval warship, was donated by India in 2023. And since few years, India, Vietnam are negotiating the possibility of India exporting the BrahMos cruise missile to Vietnam. As India has taken a more bold approach towards defense and security relations with ASEAN countries, India has already exported the BrahMos to Philippines, which also has a maritime dispute with China in South China Sea near Scarborough Shoal and Spratly Group of Islands. So Vietnam also has been pursuing the deal, and according to reports, both countries are very close to finalize the BrahMos deal. So this would take direct aim at China's aggression in South China Sea. It would help India project its influence. If China can meddle in India's backyard, which is the Indian Ocean region, by arming Pakistan or by investing in Sri Lanka and other Indian Ocean countries, India can also play this game in China's backyard by arming Philippines with BrahMos, by building closer strategic defense ties with Vietnam. And also, don't think this is just about defense, strategic ties, and countering China. Look at the economic opportunity. Today, Vietnam is one of the fastest growing economies in the world. It has emerged as a hub of startups, emerging technology, and innovation. And that's exactly the speciality of India as well, right? India is also a hub of startups and emerging leading power in the field of emerging technologies. So there's a lot of common areas where we can collaborate, from artificial intelligence to IT, right? Then the bilateral trade is at around $26 billion, which can be easily pushed above $30 billion. There's a lot of trade opportunity that exists between both sides, right? Even India invites Vietnam to participate in multilateral naval exercises like the Milan naval exercise. During COVID-19 pandemic, India had dispatched disaster management assistance by providing medical supplies and medical aid to Vietnam under Operation Sagar or Mission Sagar, through which India delivered free medical aid and supplies to several countries during the pandemic. Plus, the economic ties have great opportunity, especially in electronics and other key sectors of manufacturing, including textiles, apparels, consumer goods, etc. So, both sides are furthering this relationship, and they have elevated the strategic partnership to the level of enhanced comprehensive strategic partnership. During the last week's visit of Vietnam's president, both sides have elevated the relationship from a comprehensive strategic partnership to an enhanced comprehensive strategic partnership. So, the Indo Pacific region and the concerns and challenges present here is what is driving India Vietnam closer. Because, see, don't forget, Vietnam not only has maritime and territorial disputes with China, it has fought a limited war with China in the past, just like India China 1962 war and a standing border dispute along the Himalayas between India and China. So, we have a lot in common. And also, Vietnam closely aligns with other Indo Pacific powers like Japan, Australia, United States, Philippines. And these are all close partners for India under the Indo Pacific Doctrine. Under the Mahasagar vision, India is prioritizing this region and these countries. Under the Act East policy, which is mainly centered on the ASEAN group, Vietnam is a key member, one of the most active members of the ASEAN. So, this engagement with Vietnam aligns with all these policy goals of India. So, this is what we take away from this important visit. And some of the agreements that were signed last week between both sides, it was not a regular diplomatic engagement. What we saw was a complete transformation of the relationship, because new agreements have been signed in the field of clean renewable energy, artificial intelligence, semiconductors, health. So these priority areas are being promoted, and there exists a great defense, economic, and cultural opportunity as well, right? Because both countries can drive tourism for each other. Vietnam has been a popular tourist destination for Indian tourists, and India can easily attract Vietnamese tourists, primarily focusing on Buddhist and Hindu linkages. There are several sacred pilgrimage sites, several Buddhist temples across the Mekong Delta, from Myanmar to Laos to Cambodia to Vietnam. Many Buddhist and Hindu temples, which are deeply linked with the ancient Indian civilization. India, in fact, has restored some of the Buddhist Hindu pilgrimage sites located over here, be it the Angkor Wat temple or the famous Buddhist temple in Vietnam, and the chain of pilgrimage sites located over here. Plus, India has the Buddhist Circuit Initiative to revamp our infrastructure and tourist facilities at important Buddhist pilgrimage sites like Sarnath, Bodh Gaya, etc., to attract tourists from across these countries. So, Vietnam is a right country to focus to promote our soft relations, our soft power, and cultural ties as well. So, based on what we have discussed, please take up this practice question focusing on India Vietnam bilateral relations. Next, we have multiple articles in the paper today analyzing the 7 big appeals that were issued by the PM. Prime Minister Modi has surprised everyone, even triggered a big outrage and controversy as well. He has reiterated the 7 appeals twice in the past 48 hours. So these 7 appeals are essentially being considered as austerity measures to curb consumption of some critical commodities which we might face a shortage in the coming months, primarily because of the Iran war and the continued blockade of Hormuz. At least as of now, India had largely managed to tide over the crisis, but the crisis has been festering within. And right now, we are aware of much more details as to what the government had previously revealed with regard to the oil stocks that we have, the gas stocks that we have, fertilizer supplies, with regard to our forex reserves. There has been a fresh clarity which is coming in. And if the Prime Minister went to the extent of issuing these appeals twice, it's a clear indicator that in the coming months, if not in the next few days or weeks, in the coming months, India will have to be better prepared to deal with contingency, a COVID like contingency. That's exactly what the PM referred to as well, right? That India has enough experience to deal with such contingent situations, to curb activities, to curb consumption if required, so that we can ration it out and hold out till the war gets over. But as of now, the peace talks have largely been hitting a stalemate, right? Trump has said that the peace process is heading nowhere. Iran reportedly had sent a peace proposal, but apparently US has rejected the proposal of Iran, which means the stalemate is likely to continue. The blockade of Hormuz is likely to continue. In a worst case scenario, war might resume with fresh direct fighting and escalated attacks, which could cause long term disruption. So, as part of the 7 appeals, PM Modi has urged the Indian workers to work from home as much as possible. According to reports, industry associations have been informally notified by the government to try and encourage work from home or hybrid work as much as possible so that the fuel required for commutation can be saved. Petrol, diesel can be saved. Prime Minister has encouraged Indians to rely more on public transport instead of relying on private transport. The Prime Minister has even urged Indians to avoid buying gold for at least a year, right? India being one of the biggest consumers of gold in the world, and majority of what we consume comes through imports, right? So this places a huge burden on India's import bill. Hence, the PM has urged Indian households to defer any gold purchases and rely more on public transportation and cut down on the usage of edible oil because India imports edible oil heavily. For example, we procure palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia. We procure sunflower seed oil from Ukraine and Russia. And we have a very high dependency for cooking oil. The PM has said this is good for our health if you can cut down oil consumption, plus it can be good for the economy as India relies heavily on import of edible oil. Next, the PM has a message for the farmers and the rural sector to move away from chemical fertilizers, to rely more on natural farming and reduce the consumption of diesel for irrigation pump sets and instead use solar powered pump sets. So the appeal by the PM is not just towards the urban population, right? It's not just about the corporate sector, the IT workers, etc. It's focused on the rural parts of India as well, where massive quantities of diesel is consumed by diesel generators and irrigation pumps. The PM has urged the farming community to move towards solar energy and move away from chemical fertilizers to adopt natural farming and use Swadeshi products as much as possible to reduce reliance and dependency on foreign goods and even avoid foreign travel. The PM has spoken about Indians taking more and more foreign vacations or destination weddings, which happen from Thailand to the Middle East, right? Where Indians, especially high net worth individuals, the ultra rich Indians, tend to organize these destination weddings. The PM says this is a drain on our forex reserves. So these appeals, it has even generated some concern. It has triggered panic in the economy as well. The markets have already reacted. The industries are concerned and worried. And more importantly, it has triggered a lot of outrage and controversy and opposition as well. See, as of now, the government is saying that there's no need to panic. The government has said that the PM did not issue this appeal out of a last minute desperation. This is just long-term planning and preparedness. As of now, India is in a very good position, according to statements coming out from the Defense Ministry and other concerned ministries. Right now, we have a storage of at least 60 days of crude oil, another 60 days of natural gas, and at least 45 days of LPG rolling stock. So, at least for 2 months, India's energy supplies are largely taken care of. And even during the last 2 months of war and disruption at Hormuz, energy supplies did not see much of an impact in India, as India managed to overcome the crisis through various innovative methods. We have diversified the supplies. We have been paying a higher cost to procure oil and gas from different sources. Commercial gas has been largely diverted towards domestic household consumption. So the government has done its job, given the situation. It has fairly managed the crisis well, according to some experts. But critics point out that just because you're not seeing an immediate disruption in supplies and an immediate increase in prices doesn't mean the economy is not taking a hit. Critics are pointing out that oil marketing companies, they have been made to bear the entire burden, right? Because oil gas prices have shot up. As you know, crude oil has been in the range of 110 to $120 per barrel, which is nearly double of what it was before the war. Meaning Indian importers are paying a premium. But if you're still paying the same price for petrol, diesel from at least 4 years, you don't see any changes in the prices. That's mainly because the losses are being entirely absorbed by these oil marketing companies. According to the estimates, they are losing 1,000 crores per day, which is simply unsustainable. Not in the long run, even in the short to medium term. A daily loss of 1,000 crores is unsustainable for the oil marketing giants. According to data, they are running under recoveries of 2 lakh crores in the first quarter of 2026. That is the shortfall in their revenue collection. So you can imagine the scale of the financial crisis that oil marketing companies are staring at. Right now, the government had pressurized the oil companies to not essentially increase prices. Right? Though the prices have been liberalized, the government does work with oil marketing companies to prevent any price volatility. But critics are pointing out maybe this was done in the context of the elections that were happening in West Bengal, Assam, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. Because until then, we didn't hear anything about the dire situation or the possibility of price increase. And all of a sudden, after all the election rallies were held, after all the splurging was done by the parties and leaders, now suddenly the government is coming out with these announcements. That is the main criticism coming from the opposition parties. Right? The forex reserves have seen a depletion. It is dropping to around $703 billion, right? Which means RBI has been pumping for foreign currency to try and support the rupee, which has been constantly depreciating and falling. The Indian rupee has been one of the worst performing currencies amongst peer countries. So the political opposition has criticized the prime minister and the government, saying that this is the administrative failure of the government, that the government has not managed the crisis well. It has not informed the public. It has concealed critical information just because elections were being held. Now, where does the truth lie? Right? Is the government lying to you, or uh, is it true that India has really managed the crisis well, and it's only a long-term preparedness measure that the PM is advocating for? See, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. Of course, this war is an external disruption. India's role, India's influence definitely is limited to some extent, right? But given the scale of the problem, India did well to ensure that some supplies continued. We have diversified. But however, the failure of the government to brief the public beforehand is something which can be seen as a genuine point of criticism. Because during election campaigns, right, you did not see any austerity measure by the politicians and the parties, right? When they kept flying in planes, chartered flights, and helicopters from city to city for election campaigns, there was no focus on reducing fuel consumption. When huge rallies were being held, right, there was no focus on saving the fuel. But now the public are expected to bear the burden, essentially, right? Could the government have done better? That is a genuine question which comes up, right? Could the government have given a earlier warning so that the overall impact could have been cascaded? It could have been slowly passed down. Now, suddenly, if let's say government were to increase the fuel prices, because oil marketing companies, they have no relief in sight. As I said, they are incurring losses of 1,000 crores per day. Under recoveries are 2 lakh crores in the first quarter. Most likely the prices might be allowed to increase. See, as per financial sense, it should have been done earlier. Most countries in the world have already increased prices, right? You have to pass it down. But did the government hold back prices? Did it hold back oil marketing companies just because of elections? Because fuel prices are politically sensitive, right? Then that goes against national interests. If the government was driven by a political agenda to try and impress the voters, and then immediately after the elections are over, it is announcing these measures and probably trying to increase prices, then that's almost like deceiving the public, right? Now, urging the public not to consume gold may not work again. Yes, Indians have an unhealthy obsession with gold, right? Because of the cultural and the religious significance attached to it. Plus, it is a value of reserve, right? A buffer, a sort of investment. Definitely, there is a huge domestic demand. Majority of it is met through imports. India is one of the biggest importers of gold. But the RBI is also rising its gold deposits. In the last year itself, RBI has amassed several lakh tons of precious metal to boost up the forex reserves and reduce dependency on the US dollar. Several tons of gold has been procured by the RBI, but domestic household consumption still remains very high, and especially the jewelry which is bought and the bullion which is bought, it lies idle either in your homes or in bank lockers, doesn't add any value to the economy and just increases the import bill, right? But if the government is considering some sort of a tax to deter people from buying gold, then industry leaders believe this could backfire, right? The gold jewelry industry, they've already panicked after the prime minister's statement. They've appealed to the government and they're seeking a meeting with the concerned ministries. They're pushing for gold monetization scheme instead. They say this is much more effective if you want to really bring the stored gold into play into the economy, right? You have to bring out the value of the gold locked up in bank lockers and in your almirahs. One way to do it is through gold monetization scheme. If the government rolls out an initiative promising good returns to the investors, this can be a successful initiative which can help curb the demand for gold, right? So the jewelry industry is upset with what the government has been urging. Then you can see a similar sentiment from the travel industry. Because, see, urging people not to travel, not to take vacations may not be the right solution. Because RBI data tells us something else. When you look at remittances, outward flow of remittances, that's what the government is worried about. When outward remittances go up, basically your forex reserves will drain, right? You might think it's Indian travelers who are spending more abroad, going on these fancy vacations, or you might think it's these destination weddings which are draining our forex reserves. But the reality, the truth is that it's primarily high net worth individuals who are buying property abroad, who are investing in foreign equity, foreign debt, buying immovable assets. According to RBI's data on remittances, there has been a massive jump in ultra rich Indians, high net worth individuals in India buying immovable property in places like Dubai, Abu Dhabi, in moving massive amounts of money abroad to invest in equity and debt. That is the bigger constituent. In fact, the expenses on foreign trips has declined in the last 1 year by 3%. So what the government is saying is not entirely right, and it's neither the right approach. Instead, India should be focused on how to earn more foreign exchange reserves. One way is through tourism. Now, if you look at the travel data, the number of foreign tourists in India has dropped. It has not gone back to the pre-pandemic levels. Right? Post-pandemic, tourism has taken a big hit, and the number of foreigners coming to India has stayed below the pre-pandemic levels. So instead of urging Indians not to take vacations abroad, why doesn't the government focus on strengthening tourism, creating better facilities, amenities, promoting tourism abroad, attracting more foreign tourists, which can earn precious forex? Why not support the industries to boost our exports, to earn more foreign exchange, right? And also, if you look at agriculture, what the Prime Minister has suggested to shift to natural farming may not be the most appropriate solution. Because without chemical inputs such as fertilizers, agricultural productivity can take a big hit. Yes, the PM is absolutely right when the government recommends that farmers should try and use more solar based irrigation pumps and solar generators and reduce the consumption of diesel. That's something which can be achievable. But moving away from chemical fertilizers is simply not feasible for a country like India because this could directly create food security problems. Right? We have some examples. Countries like Sri Lanka, when they faced the economic crisis in 2021, 2022, they had experimented with this. The then Rajpaksa government, they overnight banned import of chemical fertilizers because they couldn't afford. They didn't have forex reserves. They had depleted it. They pushed the whole farming to natural farming. And immediately Sri Lanka's farming collapsed. Sri Lanka's export of tea and spices, which is the backbone of its economy, collapsed, triggering a massive crisis in the agrarian sector. So that is something you can't afford as well. That is why a lot of criticism is coming in from industry leaders, from markets, from the opposition as well. But the government is saying that it has managed the crisis very well. These are just measures designed for long term preparedness. Right now, we need not panic, we need not worry. So let's wait and watch as to how things will develop. Next, an important topic on noise pollution. See, amongst every type of pollution, one of the most ignored type of pollution is noise pollution, right? Be it during cricket matches, during festivals, during religious rallies and celebrations, political rallies, post-election victories. One thing which is common is excessive noise, from blowing whistles to bursting of firecrackers to large-scale industrial activity or vehicular movement, right? Especially in a populated, densely crowded country like India, noise pollution is a serious hazard and a serious concern. Now, when you look at safe noise levels, according to the World Health Organization, noise level below 85 decibel is acceptable, right? But anything above 85 decibels, prolonged exposure can actually result in hearing impairment. In fact, for residential areas, it is much, much lower. For commercial places, for industrial facilities, for silent zones, there are different thresholds that are set. Because see, WHO, which has studied noise pollution in detail, estimates that 16% of those suffering from a disability related hearing loss, they have encountered hearing losses mainly because of occupational noise that they have been exposed to, which means industrial and factory workers, where adequate measures are not taken to dampen the noise levels or curb the noise levels or give safety equipment like ear muffs for the workers. This is largely responsible for severe hearing loss and disabilities that are being reported amongst the working class. In India, we have around 6.3 crore people with various degrees of noise induced hearing loss, right? And this doesn't include other causes of hearing loss. This is specifically heavy, high noise, high decibel noise causing hearing loss directly, most of it related to occupational settings like industries and factories. When you look at the European Environment Agency, it estimates that noise pollution is the second biggest risk factor after air pollution, more serious than even water pollution. According to the WHO, 16 lakh healthy life years are lost every year, right? It results in a direct impact on the ability of workers to continue with a normal life. It affects worker productivity. It could even lead to various other disorders from children to old age people. Because constant exposure to higher noise level, especially above 85 decibels, can increase your cortisol levels. It can disturb your sleep, drive stress, and increased cortisol levels will harm the repair function of your body when you sleep. This can affect cognitive development amongst children, amongst infants. It leaves behind a lasting destruction, a silent destruction which will go unnoticed. So the Central Pollution Control Board of India, which regulates noise pollution, it has brought out the noise pollution regulation control rules in the year 2000. And it has given out these criteria, these thresholds. For silent zones, this is the daytime and nighttime limit. Obviously, during daytime, noise levels will be higher, and during nighttime, the noise levels would be lower. Accordingly, different thresholds are set. These are the thresholds for residential areas and commercial centers, and for industrial facilities. As you can see, it is all below 85 decibel mark. Any constant exposure to 85 decibel and above will easily result in permanent hearing loss. So, the lack of focus on enforcing these rules in India is the biggest concern being expressed by the writer. Though we have a set of rules, there are silent zones in India, there are strict standards for residential locations and commercial facilities, they are never enforced in the country. The violators are never penalized, and we don't even have adequate monitoring network and systems to keep track of noise levels across the country. Under the National Ambient Noise Monitoring Network, we barely have around 70 recording stations, and they're all present in the 7 big cities of India. So, what about other towns, other cities, and smaller villages where noise pollution could equally be a threat? Right? We don't have a monitoring system across the country. It's only 7 big cities which totally have around 70 monitoring stations, and more than 80% of them, they record higher noise levels in the range of 90 to 115 decibels. They record noise levels in the range of 115 decibel range, 90 to 115 decibel range, which is way above the WHO standards, and any long-term exposure can easily result in significant impairment, resulting in hearing loss. So it is very important to expand the monitoring network, to spread more awareness, enforce the rules, especially on industries and factories, to curb the noise levels and protect the population and especially the working class. Now, when you look at political rallies or religious events, festivals, places of worship, usually governments, local bodies, they hesitate. Politicians will also hesitate because they fear that if someone speaks about it, they might be branded as anti religious sentiments, right? It could be any faith for that matter. So, the inability of local bodies and the system to enforce the regulations is at the heart of this problem. See, some exceptions can be made. After 10 p.m., if loudspeakers have to be played, amplifiers will have to be used, special permissions will have to be obtained, where state government, local bodies, police will play a role in granting the permission. But this permission can be granted only 15 days in a year. That's the exception which has been made. But more or less across India, these events keep happening, and especially for religious cultural events, permissions are always given where loud music is played even beyond 10 p.m. Right? You see this across festivals as well. Doesn't matter which religion. Across faiths, you see such activities being conducted blatantly without any concern about the noise levels. This applies for sporting events, it applies for political rallies, it applies for industrial activities, it applies for vehicular sound as well. So, the lack of focus and attention on this important issue is what is alarming, according to this article. Now, coming to the small articles in the paper, let's take a quick look. The Chief Minister of Jammu and Kashmir, Omar Abdullah, has met Union Home Minister Amit Shah regarding the demand for restoring the statehood for Jammu and Kashmir. After J&K was reorganized in 2019, when special status under Article 370 was abrogated, the Modi government has often said that statehood would eventually be restored, even in front of the Supreme Court, which examined the constitutionality of these changes. The central government had submitted that eventually statehood will be restored, but no deadline has been specified. So, Chief Minister Omar Abdullah has been urging the center to try and restore statehood as soon as possible. And more importantly, the business rules, the conduct of business rules, they are absent. Meaning for the Union Territory of J&K, the business rules have never been specified. So this has created a confusion as to what is the role of the Lieutenant General, the LG, and what is the role of the CM. See, for nearly 5 years, JK remained as a union territory under the center's administration with elections not being held. Then after elections were held, a government was formed, right? There is a clear confusion between what is the role of the CM, what is the role of the LG. So this has to be clarified. So the Chief Minister is urging the center, the Home Ministry, to issue the clarification and notify the business rules so that the clear jurisdiction is set up. However, Omar Abdullah has supported the subject of telecommunication being placed under the LG's office. Because according to the CM, telecommunication includes tapping of phones, suspending internet services on security reasons, which is connected to national security in a sensitive region like Jammu and Kashmir. So Omar Abdullah has said it is appropriate for center to handle this through the LG's office, and the state need or the union territory need not get involved in the sector of telecommunications. But when it comes to the conduct of business between the CM's office and the LG's office, there is a lack of clarity, there is a lot of confusion, and the Chief Minister is urging the center to clarify this and eventually restore statehood as it was promised earlier. Next, a petitioner has approached the Supreme Court to recategorize schools which are teaching religious uh, teachings as charitable bodies. The Supreme Court, which has entertained the petition, has eventually said that we will not interfere. The courts need not interfere in this matter. It's a domain of the Ministry of Education, meaning the government will handle this. See, please understand, when you look at establishment of a school, right, it can be seen as a fundamental right under Article 19 as part of your right to establish a business, run a business, establish associations, etc. It can also be seen as a right under Article 30 if it's a minority institution, right? Article 30 guarantees a constitutional fundamental right for minorities, religious and linguistic minorities, to set up places of learning and education. The petitioner who approached the Supreme Court has argued that schools, if they are basically imbibing any religious teaching in the school setting, they should get covered under Article 26 that deals with freedom of religion, not under Article 19 or under Article 30. Why? What's the big difference? If the institutions are labeled as religious charitable organizations and placed under the coverage of Article 26, then they will be subjected to certain reasonable restrictions, such as on the grounds of public health, morality, public order. These institutions can be regulated by the state. But the Supreme Court has said will not interfere. It's not the domain of the courts. The Ministry of Education should be handling the classification of these institutions if they are providing any kind of religious teaching, right? Whether they should fall under Article 26 as a charitable religious institution, or should it be covered under Article 30 as a minority institution? Because according to petitioner, these institutions are being misused to brainwash the children and the youth. And he's urging the government to exercise a greater control, keeping the security of the country in mind. But Supreme Court has dismissed these alarmist concerns of the petitioner, but it has asked the central government to look into the classification of these schools which provide religious teachings. Coming to the prelim section, two important digital initiatives have been rolled out by the Supreme Court. The one case, one data framework. This will provide for complete centralized integration of all the data related to a particular case. So all the case related data from lower courts at the taluk level, all the way till high courts and Supreme Court, everything will be integrated under this system. It's essentially an integrated database for ongoing cases in the judiciary. From the lowest court to the highest court, one case, one data. For each case, it will be easy to track all the data related to it, the progress of the case, and this will help in streamlining the delivery of justice in the country. It will make it easier for the litigants to keep track of their cases, to access the required timely information. The second big initiative is the Sahay chatbot. It's a AI-powered chatbot introduced by the Supreme Court that will provide for interactive experience for the users, mainly for litigants, if they want updates on their cases, if they want to understand the functioning of the court, right, or how to approach the judiciary, the process of filing a case, etc. Any details related to the judiciary and access to justice will be made available through this AI-powered chatbot called the Sahay chatbot. Next, we have discussed about International Big Cat Alliance, the first ever summit which India is going to host from June 1st to June 3rd. If you remember last week, I've explained what is the International Big Cat Alliance. It's an India-led initiative to conserve the big cats like tigers, lions, leopards and cheetahs, the puma, jaguar and the snow leopards. So in this alliance, there are 24 member countries. right? I had shown the member countries as well. I hope all of you remember that, right? If not, please find out which are the countries and mention that in the comments. There are 3 observer countries as well. So they will all participate in the first ever International Big Cat Alliance Summit that India hosts in New Delhi. And there will be a total of 95 countries which will be participating, including many range countries, which are considered to be part of the range of these big cats. However, China, which is also one of the range countries, is likely not to participate. India was expecting that China will also take part in it, but according to emerging reports, China might skip the event. See, China is home to a native tiger population, especially towards the Russian border, towards Russia's far east in the Siberia belt. You have these large cat species, the tiger, the Amur tigers. While India holds the world's largest Bengal tiger population, or the tiger population in general, India has the largest in the range of 3,167. China has a very small native population of roughly 50 to 70 Amur tigers, which are basically the Siberian tigers from the Russian belt. So China, since it's having a very small native tiger population, it is unlikely to participate. But experts are pointing out that China is also home to the snow leopards, right? And its role is actually crucial to conserve the habitat of snow leopards and even the Amur tigers. But probably because of geopolitical reasons, China is looking to skip the event, right? So just make a note that China may not participate. The last topic for today: scientists in Europe have simulated an actual controlled earthquake underground. This has been done under the Swiss Alps, under the Alps mountain range, in some of the underground tunnels that were available. Scientists and engineers have carried out one of the world's first such experiment to generate actual earthquake-like event, a simulated seismic event to study the geology of the earth, understand the phenomena of earthquakes. This experiment is called FEAR 2, Fault Activation and Earthquake Rupture. They've done it by using high pressurized water pumped into these small holes, bore holes that were dug into the tunneling system several meters below the ground, below the Swiss Alps. See, a few years ago in South Korea, there was an accidental earthquake that the engineers had triggered when they were building a geothermal plant, right? Without understanding the mechanics of the interior of the earth. The engineers were pumping high pressure water into the boreholes they had dug. And this ended up simulating a earthquake like event in South Korea. But for the first time, a controlled experiment is being carried out mainly to understand the phenomena. See, this can apply for disaster management, right? To better understand earthquakes. And it can even be used in various hazardous industries, especially mining, in shale fracking. In shale fracking in the US, it's the same method which is employed, where the shale slabs are fractured using high pressured water which is pumped into the interior of the earth. So the lessons and learnings will be directly employed to improve disaster preparedness with regard to earthquakes. Clear? So just make a note of this experiment, the name, where it was conducted, what is its purpose. So on this note, we conclude the session and bring this analysis to an end. I hope you guys have liked the session. If you did, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.